"Your hands, that was wrong." And after that, the rancher faced something terrifying. The rancher woke up before the sun, as he had done for most of his life. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of earth and grass. His small farmhouse creaked as he stepped onto the wooden floor, boots heavy but steady. The ranch had been in his family for generations, and he felt a deep connection to the land. Every fence post, every patch of grass, and every corner of the barn was familiar to him. He took a moment to look out the window at the vast stretches of fields, rolling hills, and scattered trees. The world was quiet, almost peaceful, but he knew that the calm of the morning could change in a single moment on a ranch. After a simple breakfast of eggs, bread, and coffee, he prepared for the day. He grabbed his hat, worn from years of use, and pulled on his gloves. Stepping outside, he felt the sun begin to rise slowly over the horizon, turning the sky a gentle pink and orange. Birds began to chirp, and the cattle in the distance stirred, their low murmurs blending with the sounds of the morning. He took a deep breath and felt a sense of purpose. Ranch life was not easy, but it had a rhythm, a pattern that brought him comfort. Every day started with the same tasks, yet no 2 days were exactly alike. He first went to check on the cattle. The herd had grown over the years, and each animal had its own personality. Some were calm, others more restless. He moved among them, his steps careful and measured. When a cow nudged him, he gently pushed it back, whispering soft words to keep it calm. The animals trusted him, and he trusted them. It was a relationship built over years, one that required patience and respect. He noticed one young calf that seemed nervous, its ears flicking and eyes wide. He knelt beside it, speaking softly, letting it know he was not a threat. Its tiny body relaxed, and it leaned slightly against his shoulder, seeking comfort. Moments like this reminded him why he loved ranching, despite the hard work. The next task was checking the fences. Some sections had weathered storms and needed repairs. He walked along the boundaries of his land, examining each post and wire. The fence was more than just a barrier. It was a sign of care, a way to protect the animals and the land. As he worked, he thought about the history of the ranch. His father had taught him how to mend broken posts, how to stretch wires properly, and how to work with patience. Those lessons had stayed with him, guiding his hands and his mind. Each repaired fence was a small victory, a reminder that diligence and attention mattered. By mid-morning, he moved to the barn to tend to equipment. The smell of hay and straw was strong, mixing with the earthy scent of the animals. Tools were neatly arranged, though some had become worn and battered over time. He inspected each one carefully. A malfunctioning piece of equipment could cause problems later, and he had learned the hard way that preparation was essential. He tightened bolts, oiled hinges, and checked ropes. Every task, no matter how small, was part of a larger responsibility. Working with his hands brought him satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment that he carried with him throughout the day. Sometimes, a neighbor would stop by, often bringing news or seeking advice. Today, an elderly man from the neighboring farm approached, leaning slightly on a wooden cane. They exchanged greetings, talking about the weather, the cattle, and the crops. The conversation was brief but friendly. These moments, though small, were important. They reminded the rancher that he was part of a community, even if much of his work was solitary. The neighbor tipped his hat and continued down the road, leaving the rancher alone once more with the land. Afternoons were often spent walking the fields, checking on the livestock, and ensuring that everything was in order. He observed the way the sun moved across the sky, the shadows stretching and shrinking as the day progressed. The cattle grazed peacefully, and he sometimes paused to watch a hawk circle above, its sharp eyes scanning the ground below. Nature had a way of grounding him, reminding him of the larger world beyond his immediate responsibilities. The rancher had learned to appreciate these small moments, the quiet beauty of life on the land, even when challenges arose. As the day wore on, he began preparing for feeding the animals. The cows, horses, and goats all required different kinds of care. He measured grain and hay carefully, making sure each animal received the right amount. The animals responded to his presence with familiarity. Horses nickered as he approached, cows turned their heads toward him, and goats bleated softly. There was a rhythm to feeding time, a predictable pattern that offered comfort and stability. Yet, despite the routine, the rancher remained alert. Anything could happen at any moment. A cow could get stuck in the mud, a horse could spook, or a fence could break. The work demanded constant attention, a combination of experience and instinct. By late afternoon, the rancher allowed himself a short break. He sat on a wooden bench outside the barn, wiping sweat from his brow and taking a long drink of water. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky, casting golden light over the fields. He watched the shadows stretch across the land, feeling a sense of peace and pride. The ranch was more than property. It was a lifetime of memories, lessons, and hard work. Each day reinforced the bond he had with this place, a connection that could not easily be broken. As evening approached, he moved the livestock back into the barn for the night. He checked that each animal was safe, making sure gates were secure and bedding was comfortable. There was a sense of satisfaction in completing the day's work, knowing that he had done everything possible to care for the animals and the land. The rancher often paused in these moments, reflecting quietly on the life he had built. It was not an easy life, but it was fulfilling. He felt a quiet pride in the strength, patience, and perseverance that had carried him through years of labor and challenges. When the sun finally set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the rancher returned to his farmhouse. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of evening dew. Inside, he prepared a simple meal and ate quietly, reflecting on the day. The routine, the work, the small victories and challenges, they all blended into a sense of purpose. Life on the ranch was demanding, but it was also deeply rewarding. Before going to bed, he stepped outside one last time, looking at the darkened fields and the silhouettes of trees against the night sky. The land was calm, but he knew that each day brought new challenges and responsibilities. He felt a quiet gratitude for the life he had chosen, for the connection to the land, and for the chance to work with his hands and heart. As he closed the door and prepared to rest, he knew that tomorrow would bring more work, more lessons, and more moments that reminded him why he had devoted his life to the ranch. In this way, the rancher's life continued, full of early mornings, hard work, small victories, and quiet reflections. Each day reinforced the values he had always held: patience, responsibility, and respect for the land and animals. The routine was demanding, but it was also comforting. Every sunrise was a reminder of purpose, every task an opportunity to care, and every quiet evening a chance to reflect. Though solitary at times, the rancher never felt alone, for the land, the animals, and the rhythm of ranch life were constant companions. The morning started like any other on the ranch. The rancher woke up early, stretched, and took a moment to look over the fields bathed in the soft glow of dawn. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of dew-covered grass, and the faint sound of birdsong floated across the property. Life on the ranch was routine, but that was the beauty of it, the steady rhythm of chores and care. Today, however, was different. A new ranch hand had arrived the previous day, a young man eager to learn but inexperienced with the ways of the land. The rancher knew that teaching someone new required patience, careful observation, and clear guidance, especially when dealing with animals that could be unpredictable. The young man was already in the barn, nervously fidgeting with a rope and eyeing the cattle. The rancher walked in, his boots making soft thuds on the wooden floor, and nodded in greeting. "Morning," he said. The young man returned a hesitant smile and set about trying to lead a horse out of its stall. The horse, large and strong, shifted uneasily, sensing the nervous energy of the new helper. The rancher moved closer, observing silently at first. Experience had taught him that animals could sense fear, and that a mistake from someone inexperienced could quickly turn dangerous. As the young man gripped the horse's halter, he did so too tightly, his hands white-knuckled from fear and inexperience. The horse jerked its head, startled by the pressure. The young man panicked, trying to control it, but the more he struggled, the more agitated the animal became. The rancher stepped forward calmly, his presence grounding both the young man and the horse. "Slow down," he said, his voice firm but gentle. He reached out and adjusted the boy's hands on the halter, showing him the correct way to hold it. "Your hands, that was wrong," he said softly, making sure the words carried a sense of care rather than harsh criticism. The young man's face turned red with embarrassment. He looked down, ashamed that he had not followed the proper technique. The rancher could see the tension in his shoulders, the fear in his eyes. He remembered his own first days on the ranch, the mistakes he had made, the lessons learned the hard way. Patience was key. "Animals can feel your hands," he explained. "If you grip too hard, they panic. If you are too loose, they don't listen. Find the balance." The young man nodded slowly, trying to absorb the advice. The rancher demonstrated again, carefully guiding the horse to walk calmly out of the stall. After the immediate danger passed, the rancher took a moment to observe the young man. He was nervous but eager. That eagerness, if nurtured, could become skill and confidence. The rancher remembered the importance of encouragement alongside correction. "Good," he said, pointing out what the young man had done right. "You moved with the horse. You stayed calm after the first mistake. That matters." The young man smiled faintly, relief washing over his face. For a moment, the tension eased and the barn felt quieter, safer. Yet the small incident left the rancher thoughtful. Even a minor mistake could have serious consequences on the ranch. A horse could throw someone, a cow could break a fence, or a tool could malfunction. Experience and vigilance were not just skills, they were survival tools. The rancher walked the young man through the rest of the morning, showing him how to check the animals, how to handle equipment safely, and how to read the behavior of the livestock. Each lesson was accompanied by demonstrations, explanations, and gentle corrections. The young man followed closely, absorbing every word and gesture. By late morning, the two of them were working together to move the cattle from one field to another. The rancher stayed close, carefully observing each movement. The young man had improved, but still had moments of hesitation. The rancher's calm guidance helped the animals remain calm, creating a safe environment for both human and beast. He noticed how the horse now responded more obediently, sensing the steadier hands of its handlers. The rancher felt a quiet satisfaction. Teaching someone else was challenging, but seeing progress, however small, was rewarding. During a break, they sat on the edge of a fence, watching the field stretch into the distance. The rancher shared stories from his own early days on the ranch, stories of mistakes, learning, and lessons hard-earned. He spoke of nights spent repairing fences after storms, of calves born unexpectedly in the cold, and of times when the animal's instincts had taught him more than any human ever could. The young man listened intently, absorbing not just the technical knowledge but the mindset, the respect for the land and the animals, and the patience required to succeed. After the break, they returned to work, tending to the more stubborn animals. One horse refused to move into the pen. The young man's instinct was to pull harder to force compliance. The rancher stepped in quickly, correcting the hand position again. "Remember," he said calmly, "patience. Guide, don't force. You have to feel what the animal feels." The horse hesitated, then stepped forward, following the rancher's guidance. The young man mirrored the movements, adjusting his grip, and the horse moved willingly this time. The rancher gave a small nod of approval. Progress was slow but steady. The afternoon brought more challenges. A fence had been damaged overnight, likely by wildlife, and some cattle had wandered too close to the edge of the property. The rancher and the young man worked quickly to mend the fence and bring the animals back safely. The young man's confidence grew with each task, but he still relied heavily on the rancher's experience. Together they repaired broken posts, stretched wires, and ensured the livestock were secure. The rancher emphasized the importance of attention to detail. "Every small action matters," he said. "A loose wire or a misstep can lead to accidents. Always stay aware." As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields, the rancher reflected on the day's lessons. Teaching someone new was never easy, and yet it was necessary. The ranch had been in his family for generations, and passing on knowledge was part of preserving that legacy. The young man had learned a lot in a single day, but the rancher knew that experience would come only with time and repetition. Mistakes would happen, but guidance, patience, and encouragement could shape those mistakes into learning opportunities. That evening, after the animals were fed and the fences secured, the rancher and the young man sat quietly in the barn, cleaning tools and preparing for the next day. The young man thanked him, his voice filled with sincere gratitude. The rancher smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment. It was more than teaching, it was mentoring, shaping someone's understanding of responsibility, care, and respect for life. The incident with the horse, though small, had become a pivotal moment, setting the tone for trust and learning between them. Finally, as the night settled over the rancher stepped outside alone, looking at the fields bathed in moonlight. The day had been long, exhausting, and full of small victories and corrections. Yet, a sense of unease lingered, subtle and almost imperceptible. He shook his head, attributing it to fatigue. Life on a ranch was unpredictable, and caution was always necessary. Even when everything seemed calm, the unexpected could arise without warning. For now, though, the ranch was quiet, the animals were safe, and the young man was learning. The rancher allowed himself a moment of rest, readying for whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. Little did he know the events of the day, the correction, the nervous hands, the attentive care, were only the beginning. A lesson learned today would resonate far beyond the barn, and the quiet, routine world of the ranch was about to be tested in ways he could never have imagined. The next few days passed quietly, but the rancher could not shake a growing feeling of unease. At first, he tried to dismiss it as fatigue or the stress of teaching the new ranch hand. The young man was improving steadily, and the routine of the ranch continued as usual, yet something felt different. Small things began to catch his attention, subtle shifts in the environment that had previously gone unnoticed. A gate slightly ajar, tools misplaced when he was certain he had left them in order, and animals behaving unusually. The cattle seemed restless, ears flicking toward sounds he could not hear. Even the horses, usually calm in the afternoon sun, stamped their hooves nervously. At first, he attributed these changes to chance. Animals were unpredictable after all, and a minor disturbance in the fields could easily explain their behavior. But then came the shadows. In the early evenings, when the sun dipped low, he noticed dark shapes moving across the fields at the edge of his vision. When he looked directly, they were gone. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, perhaps a trick of the trees swaying in the wind or the long shadows cast by the setting sun. Yet the feeling of being watched persisted. He felt a chill run down his spine despite the warmth of the day. The young ranch hand noticed it too. While cleaning the barn one evening, he glanced out the window and saw movement near the far fence line. "Did you see that?" he asked nervously. The rancher nodded, feeling the tension rise in his chest. "Yes," he said quietly, "but it's probably just an animal, coyotes or something smaller." Still, the sight unsettled him. He had spent years on this land and had rarely been startled by ordinary wildlife. The unusual nature of these disturbances suggested something beyond the normal rhythm of ranch life. That night, the rancher stayed awake longer than usual. He lit a lantern in the farmhouse and sat at the table, listening to the faint sounds of the night. The wind rustled the trees and distant cattle lowed softly, but there was something else, a subtle, almost imperceptible sound that did not belong. It was a low rustling, coming from the barn or perhaps the fields nearby. His mind raced with possibilities. It could be a raccoon, a stray dog, or something harmless. But the more he listened, the more he felt a presence, watching, waiting. He could not explain the sensation, and that unsettled him even more than any visible threat. Over the next few days, the signs continued. A bale of hay was disturbed, though he had tied it securely the day before. A tool was moved from the workbench to the floor, though no one had been in the barn. The livestock were uneasy, shifting positions, and refusing to follow the usual paths in the fields. The rancher walked among them, speaking softly to calm their fears, but even the animals sensed that something was off. The young man noticed it too, and his nervousness grew. He looked to the rancher for reassurance, and the older man realized he had to maintain calm, even if he did not fully understand the cause himself. One evening, a neighbor passing by mentioned that he had heard strange noises near the ranch after dark. "Sounds like something moving through the fields," he said. "Could be coyotes, but it didn't sound right." The rancher thanked him, but unease settled more deeply into his mind. He had lived on this land for decades and had never heard sounds like that. It was not normal wildlife behavior, and it made him wary. He began checking the perimeter more carefully, walking the fence lines with a lantern, inspecting the corners of the barn, and listening intently for any unusual sounds. The nights became longer and more restless. Every creak of the farmhouse, every rustle outside made him pause. He would rise and look out the window, straining to see in the darkness. The stars shone brightly above, but they offered no comfort. Shadows stretched across the fields, and he could not shake the sense of something lurking just beyond sight. Even the young ranch hand noticed the change in his demeanor, and the tension in the barn became palpable. They moved carefully through chores, speaking less and watching more. The rancher's experience told him that vigilance was essential, and he doubled his efforts to protect the animals and the property. As days passed, the feeling of being watched intensified. He began to notice footprints in the mud near the fence lines, small, animal-like, but not entirely familiar. Some of the livestock had minor scratches or marks on their hides, as if brushed against something sharp or aggressive. Each discovery added to the mounting anxiety. The rancher could no longer dismiss these signs as coincidence. Something was indeed disturbing the usual peace of the ranch, though he could not yet identify it. He reinforced the fences, tied the gates securely, and positioned lanterns around the barn to provide better visibility at night. One night, after finishing the evening chores, he stepped outside to survey the fields. The wind was calm, and the moon cast a pale glow over the land. He moved slowly, scanning for any movement. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it, a dark figure slipping through the shadows near the far edge of the property. He froze, heart pounding, and watched as it disappeared behind a cluster of trees. He could not identify it, but it moved with a deliberate, almost intelligent grace. It was not an ordinary animal. Fear and curiosity battled within him. He knew he needed to understand what was happening before the situation escalated. The following day, he decided to set up traps and observation points around the property. He wanted to catch sight of whatever was causing the disturbances. He worked quietly with the young man, explaining the importance of staying alert and watching carefully. "We may not see it at first," he said, "but patterns emerge if we pay attention." They spent hours walking the property, noting areas where tracks appeared, where disturbances occurred, and where the animals were most restless. The rancher felt a mixture of determination and unease. He was prepared for the unknown, but he also knew that the unknown could be dangerous. By the third night, the tension reached a new level. The livestock were more skittish than ever, and the rancher could hear faint sounds that did not fit with natural wildlife. A low rustle, followed by a soft thud, echoed from the barn. He grabbed a lantern and quietly approached, careful not to startle the animals. The barn was empty, yet the air felt charged, as if something had just been there and vanished. The rancher's instincts told him to stay calm and observant. Fear, he knew, could make mistakes more likely, and mistakes on a ranch could be costly. The young man, sensing the rancher's concern, asked in a whisper, "Do you think it's dangerous?" The rancher did not answer immediately. He studied the shadows and listened intently. "Maybe," he said finally, "but we'll handle it. Stay calm and watch closely." The tension in the barn was palpable. Every sound, the creaking wood, the shifting hay, the animals moving, seemed amplified in the quiet night. The rancher knew that vigilance was more important than ever. Over the next several days, the pattern continued. Disturbances increased in frequency, and the sense of being watched became almost tangible. The rancher reinforced his routines, checking fences multiple times a day, observing the animals closely, and taking note of every unusual sound. He began to anticipate where problems might occur, guided by instinct and experience. Yet no matter how much he prepared, the unknown element continued to loom, reminding him that the ranch, no matter how familiar, could always present surprises. Despite the fear and uncertainty, the rancher remained composed. He knew that panic could worsen the situation, both for him and for the young man learning under his guidance. Patience, careful observation, and steady action were his tools. He also realized that this experience, though frightening, was a lesson in vigilance and responsibility. The land, the animals, and even the smallest disturbance demanded attention and respect. Each sign, no matter how minor, could provide crucial information if noticed and interpreted correctly. By the end of the week, the rancher had become acutely aware of every detail around him. He noticed subtle changes in the wind, shifts in the direction of footprints, and variations in animal behavior that he had once overlooked. His senses were sharpened, his mind focused. The ranch, once a place of routine, had become a stage of suspense, a place where careful observation and quick thinking were necessary to maintain safety. The experience reminded him that even in a familiar world, the unexpected could emerge without warning. The night air was colder than usual, sharp and biting, as the rancher stepped outside the farmhouse. The moon hung low in the sky, casting pale silver light across the fields, turning familiar shapes into long, twisting shadows. The animals were restless in their pens, shifting from hoof to hoof, ears alert and eyes wide. Even the wind seemed different, moving silently through the trees instead of rustling loudly. The rancher paused at the edge of the barn, lantern in hand, and took a deep breath. Tonight, he told himself, he would get to the bottom of the strange disturbances that had plagued his property for days. He moved slowly, deliberately, each step calculated. Experience taught him that rushing could startle the animals and make the unknown more dangerous. The barn loomed ahead, dark and shadowy, every creak of the wood echoing unnaturally in the still night. He checked the doors and gates carefully, ensuring they were secure, then began walking the perimeter of the livestock area. His lantern threw small circles of light onto the ground, revealing nothing unusual, yet the sense of being watched was stronger than ever. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. A dark figure shifted behind a tree line, low to the ground, moving silently and deliberately. The rancher froze, heart pounding, his mind racing. He could not immediately identify what it was. It did not behave like a deer or a coyote, moving with purpose rather than instinct. He lowered the lantern slightly, letting its soft light illuminate the field without revealing his exact location. He wanted to see more, understand what he was dealing with before taking action. The young ranch hand had chosen to stay in the farmhouse, aware of the tension in the air. The rancher knew he needed to face this alone, at least at first. He crept closer, stepping carefully over rocks and uneven ground, listening to every sound. The rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of cattle, even the whisper of wind through the trees became amplified in his senses. Every instinct in his body told him that this was not a simple animal or harmless intruder. Something was moving in the darkness with awareness, observing as much as he observed it. As he approached the barn, he caught sight of the figure again. It was large, almost blending into the shadows, and its movements were deliberate, calculated. Fear surged through him, but he forced himself to remain calm. Panic would make mistakes likely, and mistakes could be dangerous. He adjusted his grip on the lantern, allowing it to illuminate the nearby area while keeping most of himself hidden in darkness. Slowly, he moved forward, trying to get a better view, to understand what had come onto his land. The sound of shifting hooves or claws reached his ears, a scraping, deliberate and cautious. The animals were tense, sensing the presence before he could fully identify it. He could feel their unease, the way their muscles tensed, ready to flee if needed. The rancher knew that if the creature approached the livestock, the consequences could be serious. He needed to intervene, but he also needed to understand what he was facing. Every step brought him closer to the unknown, and his mind raced with strategies, precautions, and possibilities. Then, a low sound, almost a growl, echoed from the shadows. The rancher froze again, heart hammering. It was unlike any sound he had ever heard on the ranch. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He whispered under his breath, telling himself to stay calm, to stay alert. Slowly, he circled the barn, keeping the lantern high to illuminate as much as possible. His eyes searched every shadow, every dark corner for movement, for signs of the creature that had disturbed his peace for so many days. Suddenly, the figure moved closer, slipping silently between the trees. The rancher could now see it more clearly, a pack of large coyotes, their fur dark and matted, eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. They moved with purpose, hunting instinctively yet strangely boldly, unafraid of the human presence. The livestock had detected them long before, and their restless behavior now made sense. The rancher's pulse quickened, but he did not panic. Years of experience had prepared him for dangerous encounters, and he knew that calm, deliberate action was essential. He raised his lantern, casting light directly toward the animals. The coyotes paused, assessing the situation. The rancher's voice, low but firm, cut through the night. "Back! Stay back!" he shouted, though his voice was steady, not frantic. The creatures hesitated, uncertain, circling at the edge of the light. The rancher realized that the coyotes had been emboldened by the darkness and the isolation of the ranch. They had been testing the boundaries, searching for an opportunity. Tonight he would make sure the livestock remained safe. He began moving slowly toward the coyotes, waving the lantern to assert his presence. He threw small objects, sticks, stones, toward the ground near them, startling them without causing harm. The animals scattered slightly, startled by the sudden motion, but the rancher stayed composed, guiding them back to safety. One of the horses neighed nervously, and the rancher whispered calming words, placing his hand gently on its neck. His hands moved with confidence, learned over decades, steadying the animal and asserting control without fear. The coyotes retreated slightly, realizing that the rancher was not an easy target. They continued to circle, testing him, but the rancher remained vigilant. He moved carefully, positioning himself between the livestock and the predators. He could see the intelligence in their eyes, their awareness, yet he also sensed their hesitation. The rancher understood that animals, even wild ones, respected strength, calmness, and courage. He maintained a steady presence, speaking softly, moving deliberately, and asserting control over the situation. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, the coyotes began to retreat further, slipping silently into the shadows. The rancher did not chase them. He knew that persistence could provoke aggression. Instead, he focused on securing the livestock, checking fences, and reinforcing gates. The tension in the barn gradually eased as the animals settled, their eyes still alert but less fearful. The rancher took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and lingering adrenaline. He had faced the threat and protected his animals, but the experience had reminded him of the unpredictable nature of life on the ranch. The young ranch hand emerged cautiously from the farmhouse, drawn by the sounds of the confrontation. The rancher nodded at him reassuringly. "It's okay," he said. "They're gone for now, but we need to be more careful. Watch the fields, especially at night." The young man nodded, his face pale but attentive. He had witnessed the courage and calm of the rancher firsthand, learning that experience, vigilance, and presence of mind could make all the difference when facing the unknown. The rest of the night was quiet, but the rancher did not rest immediately. He walked the perimeter again, lantern in hand, checking every corner, every shadow. The adrenaline had not fully faded, and he knew that the coyotes or other threats could return. Each step, each careful observation, reinforced his understanding of responsibility. Life on the ranch was unpredictable, and every action mattered. By the time he returned to the farmhouse, the sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn, painting the fields in soft gold. The events of the night left a lasting impression on the rancher. He reflected on the subtle signs he had noticed days earlier, the restless animals, the displaced tools, the shadows moving in the distance. All of these had been clues, warnings of the approaching challenge. Experience had prepared him to respond, but vigilance and calm had made the difference. He realized that even in a familiar, controlled environment, danger could appear unexpectedly, testing courage, skill, and patience. By morning, the rancher felt a quiet pride. He had faced the unknown, protected his livestock, and maintained control without panic or recklessness. Yet he also understood that vigilance could not waver. The events of the night were a reminder that the ranch, no matter how familiar, demanded respect and attention. He began planning adjustments, reinforcing fences, adding lights, and setting up observation points to ensure that the livestock remained safe in the days ahead. The experience had been terrifying, but it had also strengthened his understanding of responsibility and the delicate balance between humans and nature. The morning sun rose slowly over the ranch, casting golden light across the fields, the barn, and the fenced pastures. The events of the previous night still lingered in the rancher's mind. Though the immediate danger had passed, the experience had left him alert, cautious, and reflective. Every detail replayed in his thoughts, the shadows slipping through the trees, the way the coyotes had moved with intelligence and boldness, and the restless animals sensing the presence of something unknown. He realized that life on the ranch, no matter how routine or familiar, was always intertwined with the unpredictable. The first task of the morning was to inspect the fences and gates once again. Though he had done this countless times before, he now approached it with renewed care. Every post, wire, and latch received meticulous attention. He wanted to ensure that the livestock would remain safe, that no entry point was left exposed. The young ranch hand followed closely behind, observing carefully and learning how attention to detail could make the difference between safety and disaster. The rancher explained each step, emphasizing the importance of diligence, patience, and foresight. "It's not just work," he said quietly. "It's responsibility. Every small choice matters." Once the fences were secured, the rancher moved among the livestock, checking each animal carefully. He knelt beside a young calf, running his hands along its coat, and whispered calming words. The animals responded to his presence with trust, a reflection of the bond he had cultivated over the years. Even the horses, which had been tense the night before, now nuzzled his hands and neck with gentle familiarity. It was a comforting sight, one that reminded him why he had devoted his life to the ranch. Protecting these creatures was more than a job, it was a duty, a responsibility he carried deeply in his heart. The young ranch hand, still a little shaken from the previous night, watched and listened carefully. He asked questions about behavior, signs of stress in animals, and how to predict trouble before it happened. The rancher answered patiently, sharing not just knowledge but the wisdom that came from decades of experience. "Animals teach us," he explained. "They react to what we feel, to what we do, and sometimes to what we can't even see yet. Respect them, watch them, and you'll learn more than any book can teach." The young man nodded, absorbing every word, realizing that ranch life was as much about understanding and observation as it was about physical work. By mid-morning, the rancher began preparing for routine chores, including feeding and watering the animals. He measured hay and grain carefully, ensuring that each animal received the right amount. The young man helped, following instructions closely, gaining confidence with each task. Despite the lingering tension from the previous night, the rancher felt satisfaction in watching the young man grow, learning to anticipate and handle challenges. The events of the past few days had been a harsh lesson, but they had also become a teaching opportunity, reinforcing the importance of vigilance, calm, and preparedness. After feeding the animals, the rancher decided to walk the property once more. He wanted to assess the land, check for any further disturbances, and observe the subtle signs that might indicate another threat. The field stretched out under the sun, peaceful yet alive with small movements of wildlife. Birds flew overhead, insects buzzed in the grass, and the cattle grazed calmly, a stark contrast to the restless behavior of recent nights. As he walked, the rancher reflected on the events that had unfolded. He realized that fear and respect for the unknown were part of life on the ranch. The land could provide sustenance, beauty, and comfort, but it could also present challenges that tested courage and skill. Returning to the barn, he spent time repairing and reinforcing structures. Broken boards were replaced, gates were tightened, and additional measures were taken to prevent future intrusions. The rancher knew that preparation was the best defense against danger. It was not enough to react. One had to anticipate, plan, and act with foresight. The young man assisted, learning hands-on, understanding that true ranch work required both physical effort and mental alertness. Each repair, each adjustment became a lesson in responsibility and care. As the day progressed, the rancher allowed himself a brief pause. He sat on a bench outside the barn, taking in the view of the fields, the distant hills, and the soft sway of trees in the wind. He thought about the previous nights, the tension, the fear, the moments of uncertainty, and felt a mixture of relief and pride. He had faced a real challenge, one that tested not only his skills but his judgment and composure. The ranch had remained safe, the livestock unharmed, and the young man had witnessed firsthand the qualities required to manage life in such a demanding environment. In the afternoon, the rancher began reflecting on the lessons learned. He realized that life on the ranch was not just about hard work or routine chores, it was about respect. Respect for the animals, respect for the land, and respect for forces that could not always be controlled. He understood that vigilance was a responsibility, not a burden, and that even small actions, such as a correction in how hands held a halter or a careful check of the fence, could prevent significant problems. The night's terrifying encounter had become a teaching moment, one that would resonate for years to come. The young ranch hand, now more confident, began assisting in observing and managing the property. He asked questions about animal behavior, safety measures, and strategies for handling unexpected events. The rancher answered each question, drawing on experience, knowledge, and insight. Together, they walked the fields, inspected fences, and ensured that the livestock were calm and secure. The young man began to understand that ranch life required patience, observation, and a willingness to learn from both mistakes and successes. As evening approached, the rancher completed the final chores of the day. Livestock were fed and watered, gates were checked, and tools were cleaned and organized. The rancher took a final walk among the animals, speaking softly, checking that each was comfortable and untroubled. The sun set behind the distant hills, painting the sky with shades of orange, pink, and purple. The quiet of the evening felt different now, calm but alive, peaceful yet reminding him that vigilance was never complete. The rancher knew that the events of the past week had left a permanent mark on the land, on the young man, and on himself. As night fell, the rancher and the young man sat outside the farmhouse, sharing a quiet meal. The tension that had dominated recent days had eased, replaced by reflection and a sense of accomplishment. The rancher spoke of responsibility, courage, and the lessons learned from facing the unexpected. He emphasized the importance of patience, calm, and careful observation. "Every day teaches something new," he said. "Even when things seem routine, there's always something to learn." The young man listened, absorbing the wisdom that could only come from experience and facing real challenges. Before going to bed, the rancher stepped outside one last time. The moonlight bathed the fields in silver and the stars shone brightly overhead. He walked slowly, observing the land and the animals, feeling a deep connection to the ranch. The nights might bring uncertainty, the days might bring hard work, but this was the life he had chosen and built. It was a life of responsibility, learning, and care, a life that demanded courage, patience, and respect for the world around him. The events of the past week had been terrifying, but they had also strengthened him. He had faced the unknown, protected his livestock, and guided the young man through real challenges. The rancher understood now more than ever that life on the ranch was a balance of effort, awareness, and respect for forces both known and unseen. Each challenge was a lesson, each moment a reminder that preparation and vigilance were key to safety and success. By the time he returned to the farmhouse, the rancher felt a sense of closure. The coyotes had retreated, the livestock were safe, and the young man had gained experience and confidence. The night's terrors had become a story of caution, learning, and resilience. The rancher allowed himself a moment to rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring new tasks, new responsibilities, and new lessons. Yet he also knew that he was prepared, experienced, and capable of facing whatever might come. In the quiet hours before sleep, the rancher reflected on the most important lesson of all. Life, whether on a ranch or elsewhere, is unpredictable. The world can present challenges and fears without warning, but courage, vigilance, patience, and knowledge allow one to face them successfully. Responsibility is not just about hard work. It is about awareness, careful observation, and learning from every situation. The ranch, with its fields, livestock, and shadows, had tested him, and he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more mindful of the delicate balance of life. As he finally lay down to rest, the rancher felt gratitude for the land, for the animals, for the young man learning under his guidance, and for the lessons that only real experience could teach. Life on the ranch would continue, with its routines, its challenges, and its quiet beauty. And the rancher knew that, no matter what the future held, he would meet it with calm, courage, and respect, just as he had faced the terrifying night that had forever changed his understanding of responsibility and vigilance.